Hello and welcome to Maiden, Matriarch with me, Louise. My guest today is Colette Colfer, Substack author and lecturer in world religions. We started off by talking about the parallels between transgenderism and indeed progressivism and other religious belief systems, whether or not it's a Christian heresy, the ways in which it's dissimilar to other kinds of religion across the world. And then in the extended part of the episode, we spoke in more detail about the situation in Ireland, specifically how Ireland has gone from being a very pious Catholic country to secularising extraordinarily quickly, and how progressivism in particular has come to be such a dominant ideology. That extended version of the episode is available at louiseperry.substack.com, where, as always, you can also find the back catalogue of extended episodes, the bonus episodes I do with my husband, and the MMM chat community. Enjoy. Many of you will know that Christianity is a subject of fascination for me, and the role of Christianity in shaping the modern world is a theme I return to again and again on the podcast. My view is that we really can't understand the world or ourselves without getting to grips with it, which is why I'm very glad to point you towards a new online course called 321. It's an introduction to Christianity that's imaginative, thoughtful, engaging. It assumes absolutely no prior knowledge. It's presented by the wonderful Glenn Scrivener, who has been a guest on the MMM podcast previously, and I've also been a guest on his show. Glenn presents 8 video-led sessions which are based around some beautiful animated stories that illustrate the Christian message. You can check it out for free at 321course.com/MMM. Just enter your email, choose a password, and you're in. There's no spam, there's no fees. Just visit 321course.com/MMM. And now onto the show. Okay, Colette, can we start by talking about your religious background? So am I right that you were raised in a, not just a Catholic household, but a very pious Catholic household?
I suppose so, yeah. I mean, I grew up in Ireland, small town Ireland, in 1970s. 99%, over 99% of people in the town would have been Catholic. Same in my school. I went to Catholic schools run by nuns. My family regularly said the rosary at night. We went to mass every Sunday. Religion was kind of the regular feature in our lives. I went through childhood. I mean, I took part. I didn't question it too much. I quite liked it all, actually. You know, the ritual, the incense, the routine of it. The nuns. We had lovely nuns in the school I was in, except for one, maybe. um, so it was just part of life in Ireland at that time. It was something that I didn't question. And in my teens, actually, which I've never really spoken about this before, but in my teens, I learned guitar, and my guitar teacher ran the local folk group in the Catholic Church, and so she got involved in these other folk groups, and some of them were born again Christian. So I kind of fell into that when I was about 16, which was basically I fancied a guy in another choir, and ended up they prayed over me and said, you know, if you're going to fall, you'll fall, allow yourself to fall. So I let myself fall, and there was all this speaking in tongues thing, and it was all kind of terrifying, actually, because they really believed it was the Satan and the devil, and I was working in a haunted house at the time. So I kind of see the dangers of belief systems, particularly when teenagers are desperate to find, you know, meaning and something that, you know, that they can help them through what is a difficult time, I suppose. So
Yeah.
yeah. I'm no longer practicing Catholic. I teach world religions. I love all of them, actually. So I teach the 4 main religions that I teach would be Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism. And I think they all have strengths. I mean, I would have taught a little bits of other things, you know, paganism or. And I made loads of radio programs actually about religions too. So I'm just generally fascinated by religions.
When you argue that transgenderism is a religion, you're not using it in an insulting way. Some people sometimes use describing some ideology of any kind as a religion as a means to denigrate that religion. And of course, saying cult would be even worse. But that's not your intention, I don't think.
No, it's not my intention. My intention is to point out that it is a belief system. And as a belief system, and we living in a multicultural, pluralistic society, that we can accept that some people believe this, but we also must take account of people who don't. I approach religions from what's called the phenomenological perspective, which is essentially not trying to judge the truth or not of somebody's religious belief. There is one phenomenologist of religion called Ninian Smart, and he puts it like that God is real for Christians, whether God exists or not. So, in the same way, I think gender identity is very real for people who have gender identity. Whether gender identity is real or not is a different matter. But I just don't think everybody should be compelled to believe or to prioritize gender identity or to display pronouns, all of the associated things that go with it.
Talk me through the ways in which it's similar to religion, because it's not entirely like, say, monotheistic religions that most of us will be familiar with, but it does. There are some interesting parallels.
There are so many parallels, actually. I mean, there's the emotional aspects of it, there's the ethical aspects of it, and there's the intellectual aspects of it, which all have religious parallels. And whilst I say it is a new religion, I also think it's different to many of the religions. I would classify it actually as a political religion, in that it is trying to change policies and laws. The ways in which it is like a religion would be, for example, the foundational aspect of it really is this concept of gender identity, which is scientifically unfalsifiable. It's this internal subjective sense of self. There's no empirical proof that such a thing exists. So we're depending on people to explain their sense of self, and we can trust that what they say is true, in the same way that, for example, I think there's a lot of parallels between gender identity and soul. The idea of being wrong and born in the wrong body, that we are containers for a spirit or a soul or an energy that's poured into us, which is the same way, in gender identity, there's the idea of being born in the wrong body. There's also practices, there's a calendar, holy days, days of remembrance, there are rituals, the idea of transformation, of changed. In Catholicism, there's the idea of transubstantiation, that the bread and wine become the literal body and blood. So there's the idea that a man's body can become a woman's body, or a woman's body can become a man's body. So it's a form of transubstantiation. And there's so many other things. There's a change of name, changes of names. For example, when I did my confirmation, I was age 12. It's usually you're going through puberty around that age. Cultures all around the world have rituals to mark that, but we had to change a name. We were told to choose a Catholic saint. I remember I couldn't find one at the time that I really liked, and I chose Monica, which I always regretted. But names, sacrifice. There is bodily modification. I mean, even if you think of Judaism and circumcision, what else? Change of presentation. The idea of gender identity is sacred, but also that, like Durkheim, the sociologist, talked about religions as societies. Actually, they keep a community together. So there is very much a sense of community amongst people who have gender identities. There's the symbol, the Progress Pride flag. I mean, there are so many things. There is the display of pronouns is like, you can say that's like displaying a crucifix for people who are Christian and want to display that belief. So a lot of my work colleagues at the moment use pronouns. And once you see the pronoun, that person, they understand that gender identity is something that's really important. And so they believe there's a need to display that belief. There are heretics, there are blasphemers, there are apostates. So somebody who has transitioned, for example, and then detransitions, they would be considered the apostates. They're shunned. There are sacred ideas. During Pride Month in particular would be considered a kind of a sacred month. That actually, another interesting idea is there is this E.B. Edward Burnett Tyler, who was an anthropologist around in the 19th century, and he had this idea of survivals. And the idea of a survival was that as societies progress or as they change, that certain practices, some practices are left behind, but some practices move with the society even though their original association has changed. So, for example, when somebody sneezes today, we say, bless you. Why do we say bless you? Because in the past it was believed that was a spirit or a demon was exiting the body. Now we no longer have that belief, but we still say bless you. Or priests in Catholic churches still face the east, which is the direction of the rising sun. I think Pride is during June, which is the summer solstice. So, there's a survival aspect there, and also the idea of the gender identity as soul is a survival as well. Yeah, I've probably said enough for now. Yeah.
One quirk that just occurs to me is that, which maybe does have parallels with some other religious practices, but is that within transgenderism, you have trans people themselves, and then you have the allies, the much larger group of people. And I guess one parallel might be with a priesthood or something like that, but there's clearly two tiers within the belief system.
There is a hierarchical structure. I mean, you could think of the caste system in Hinduism, for example. You could think in Catholicism, you've got the Pope, the archbishops, the bishops, the priests, and then the people who go to mass. So the hierarchy is the believers, I suppose, the family, the community.
And of course, sometimes gender non-conforming people of different kinds, well, gender non-conforming males, to my knowledge, this is always the case, can have a kind of sacred role in different religions. I mean, I did an episode last year on Hydra, and I believe within Roman paganism as well, eunuchs had a sacred role sometimes. So this isn't unprecedented that you would see cutting off the male genitalia as having religious significance.
That's right. I kind of think that can be considered connected to the idea of the soul as something higher than the body. And the body has been associated with sin, whereas the soul is something that's higher. That it's the body that does bad things or things that are considered bad. Actually, interestingly, the body is often associated with the feminine. So the feminine is the earth, Gaia. I think that's because the seed is planted in the earth in the same way the seed is planted in the woman's in the womb. So the idea of transcending the limitation of the body. Saints did it too. Catholic saints, they would have, done awful things to their bodies sometimes.
One way in which transgenderism differs from many other religions is that they, or all, I don't know, I mean, I'm asking you as a world religions expert, is there's no deity. I mean, there's the supernatural belief in the sense that if you gender identity is supernatural, but there isn't a god or gods, really. I don't think so.
So other religions don't have gods, like Taoism and Buddhism. I know there are deities within Buddhism, but it's often considered to be an atheistic or more philosophical religion. The concept of gender identity is the sacred concept or the sacred idea really at the heart of it.
Would you also situate transgenderism, though, alongside other political belief systems? So, for instance, it's very rare to come across someone who believes in transgenderism and doesn't also hold views about lesbian and gay rights and race, and to a lesser extent class. And there's a package, right, of which this is maybe the most religious component. I'm kind of question begging there, but it does come as a package in almost all cases, would you say?
Yeah, I think it does. So it's probably associated then to the idea of oppression and privilege and intersectionality, and they all work together. And actually, I do think that these are all can be said to be founded on a kind of a Christian European idea, which, of equality and social justice and liberation and look after the most oppressed. And also another thing about gender identity, I remember once speaking with, it was a trans woman, and she said, "Oh, but I'm Catholic. I'm Catholic. I go to mass um, every week." So I don't think it's an exclusive belief system. We live at a time when there's a kind of a pick and mix spirituality, or it's sometimes called as a spiritual supermarket. So we can all have a bit of that, have a bit of that, have a bit of that. So, a lot of people who are gender ideologists, and I do think it is an ideology, would also have other religious beliefs as well. They're not exclusive.
Yeah, the parallels with Christianity are very striking, to the extent that I often think that maybe it's not. It clearly has religious qualities, but maybe it could be better understood as being a Christian heresy, in that it takes so many Christian ideas, but then really subverts them, and obviously also subtracts God and Christ and all sorts of important things within Christianity. But yeah, as you say, not just equality, but a lot of the rhetoric, and this is not just transgenderism, but also progressivism in general. You see, as once you start looking for Christian themes, they just see them again and again and again.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you say, I think there are things in it that aren't there in other religions. Like, I think in other religions, there is a big thing about humility and about maybe transcending the ego, or understanding that there is something transcendent, that we are tiny, tiny. I was reading an article yesterday about Zen Buddhism, and it said there's a lot of parallels between Zen Buddhism and modern psychology. But in Zen, the idea is to acknowledge, or to move beyond the ego, to move beyond the idea of self, whereas in modern psychology, it's all about developing the self. So I think within gender ideology, there's a huge focus on the self and the ego. I'm not sure it's very healthy for the individual or for society. So, but the problem is that we're at a time in Ireland that we can't even have these conversations. It's just, this is a topic that is not discussed in Ireland at all. Well, I can't say at all, because it does happen very occasionally. But I think it's better that we bring it out into the open. But it seems to be the will of the activists that, we're to try and silence and all debate.
And it's very striking that in a country like Ireland, which has gone from being very religious, more religious than Britain, quite recently, has now become very aggressive on some of these. The mainstream has become very aggressive on some of this progressivism stuff, including transgenderism. And I can't help but assume that there's a transference of some kind going on here, right? The loss of one religious belief system has led to a vacuum, and into it has rushed this new one, which has some Christian elements, but is important. It's different in important ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and I would argue that actually gender ideology is filling the gap that has been vacated by the Catholic Church to a large extent. Um, the Catholic Church, when I was growing up, if somebody said they were an atheist, they were frowned upon. They were ostracized. Oh, that person's an atheist. Whereas now we're living at a time in Ireland where it's almost more difficult for a person who's Catholic and say, "Oh, I'm a practicing Catholic." They can be mocked, treated like, "Oh, so strange and outdated." Whereas gender identity, the theory of gender identity, really is something that's celebrated. That's, this is the new sacred belief system in Ireland to a large extent. I got in trouble for saying that recently with a man who's a principal in a school, and he said it's terrible that I'm making the comparison. He wants Catholicism gone. He uses pronouns himself in his I saw that the other day because I looked up on LinkedIn. He uses pronouns himself, which I didn't know at the time. We got into this debate, and but I think we should acknowledge that. I mean, if you think in Ireland, I was looking it up before I started chatting to you. In 1979, I was 8. The Pope came to Ireland. The population in Ireland at the time was 3.4 million. 2.7 million people in Ireland went to see the Pope.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I
Yeah.
worked it out 79%. And in 1961, around 95% of Irish people were Catholic. It's now in 2022, in the latest census, is the lowest figure since records began at 69%. And they are people who identify as Catholic. They're not necessarily practicing going to Mass, engaging in the rituals. So our Ireland has changed so dramatically in the last 50 years. It's enormous.
It is enormous. I mean, and obviously this is not by no means unique to Ireland, but it does seem to be particularly pronounced in Ireland. Yeah, I mean, this is a big question. What has caused this? What do you think is the most persuasive academic theory as to why dechristianization has happened so quickly, not least in Ireland?
I think there are so many factors that play into it. Technology, communication, um, changing social values. Contraceptives weren't even legal in Ireland when I was growing up. Homosexuality wasn't decriminalised until 1993. Um, in Ireland specifically, I think in the 1990s, a lot of scandals came out about the Catholic Church, and there was kind of a rush to escape from it. Stories about the Magdalene laundries, about um, abuse within various institutions start to really be discussed in the open. So I think there was a rush to get away from Catholicism. Ireland wanted to be seen as progressive. We had all these links with countries all over the world. And so Catholicism was seen as kind of backwaterish and uh, let's get away from it. So uh, also, we have very strong, very, very strong gender lobby groups in Ireland, hugely powerful with international links. I mean, that's one thing about the gender identity lobby group, is that they are multinational. So it's like a multinational organization, and they're all interconnected. It was in 2015 when same-sex marriage was, we passed it in a referendum.
Mm.
And within weeks, I think it was weeks, certainly months, the Gender Recognition Act was passed. But there was no debate. I was oblivious. I had no idea that we had this legislation. Even if I did know, I probably would have supported it without thinking too deeply about it. The strong lobby group as well.
I mean, isn't that amazing? Though 22 years from homosexuality being decriminalised to same-sex marriage being passed.
Yeah,
That's so quick, much quicker than in Britain and in
yeah,
any other country that I know of. I find it so interesting and mysterious, the whole question of secularisation. It clearly tracks with countries becoming richer. Ireland's become a lot richer very quickly. Irish GDP per capita is now higher than the UK's GDP per capita, as partly being juiced by the tax regime, but still, like it's a much, much wealthier country. I've always wondered if something like fall in child mortality would um, remove one incentive for people to be religious, particularly a religion like Christianity that offers the hope of afterlife, because people would so desperately need that if they were expecting a third of their children to die before adulthood, and that's just not our. Fortunately, that's
yeah.
not our reality anymore. But I don't know.
No, that's a
I'm
great point. Yeah.
yeah. I don't really
Mm.
know though. I like these are just theories, but
We move a lot more. I mean, the sense of community has changed. When I
yeah,
grew up, people were very much rooted in the areas where they lived, whereas that has changed too. There's more changing. You move. Oh, well, yeah, I do think it has changed more. You move more to the city, marry older women, careers. So yeah, so many factors feed into it, I think.
as an aside, I was reading a book about the Industrial Revolution yesterday, and there's this interesting feature of the Industrial Revolution in Britain saw this enormous spike in population, and there are various theories as to why. One thing that clearly happened was that mortality went down because of improved technology, but also births went up a bit because people were getting married younger. And one theory as to why people got married younger, because this is of course still in an age where you're expected to get married before you can have sex, is that people were going to urban centres where they were away from their extended family networks, and they didn't. Basically, it was harder for extended families to stop young people getting married, and so they just went for it. A complete aside, but anyway, like it's. I think that urbanization must be an enormous factor in this as well. That loosening of the clan effect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So with the loosening of the clan, then this belief system is providing a new clan, and
Yeah.
people do want that sense of
Yeah.
meaning, purpose, community, which is no longer there within Catholicism in Ireland. Too for much larger numbers of people. So this offers a new belief system and network, and the idea of being good, which is really important. That I need to be seen as good, I need to think of myself as good, and therefore I am going to do what I believe to be good. And they're sold this. I think people who don't think too deeply about it, maybe, because I often chat to people about it and they don't see that they're contradicting themselves. They say, oh yeah, everybody should be whoever they want to be. If a man identifies as a woman, let him be a woman. And I say, well, what about women's sports? Oh, no, 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 they shouldn't be allowed in women's sports. So without seeing that they're connected, or for example, social transition of children in schools, do you think a child should be allowed to change their name and in school? Yeah, why not? Why not? Leave them be who they want to be. And what about puberty? No, no, not puberty blockers. No, not medicalization. So there's often contradictions that people have themselves. They want to be able to say, yes, let's people be whoever they want to be. And that's a very easy surface. I think of it as a surface kind of an idea that hasn't really been, the depths of it haven't been, and the complications haven't been examined.
I mean, as often the way, isn't it? I think people are incredibly good at holding contradictory beliefs in their heads at the same time. I think it's one of our talents as human beings. Um, yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you about the offer of progressivism is the sense of being a part of something. Although I think that in a sense it's worse. I mean, there are a bunch of ways in which I think it's a worse religious system than Christianity. One of which is that there is no scope for forgiveness, really. I mean, if you're from one of these cursed groups, there isn't really anything you can. I mean, there's I suppose processes of confession and so on in terms of acknowledging your privilege, but you're never really forgiven. There isn't really any scope for redemption. It does function more like a caste system in
Yeah,
that sense.
yeah. So the idea of original sin is to be cis heteronormative.
Mm.
And yeah, like you said, you mentioned about confessions. There's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of, think of Roisin Murphy, the singer. She had to make a public confession to cleanse herself of the sin of saying something that went against us. I agree with you completely that there are differences as well.
It also doesn't seem to. Well, I don't know. I mean, it's so hard. I know, of course, we want to take the phenomenological approach, but it's so hard to, of course, because we all have bring our own biases and so on. And my strong sense is that Christianity is preferable to this new religion. But clearly, a lot of people don't feel that way, and clearly, lots of people have rushed towards this and have resoundingly rejected the religion of their grandparents. I mean, what do you think? What do you think makes this new religion so much more attractive than, say, Irish Catholicism in the Irish context?
To be honest, I have no idea. No, that's that. Well, oh, why is it more attractive?
Individual freedom for some individuals, not for everyone.
I think maybe it just does come back to this the vacuum idea. Well, if there is no soul or spirit or religious terms, that we need to have it somewhere. So it's, with migration, there's the push and pull factors. So there's the push and pull factors with gender ideology and Catholicism, I suppose. So there's things that are pushing people away from, or have pushed things away from Catholicism, and there's the pull factor of this oh, we're progressive, we are the good people, we are the kind people, we are inclusive, our focus is on diversity. Without, well, diversity, do you really think that it's that diverse when you don't accept anybody who thinks differently? Or actually, gender equality is a factor that I think plays into it too, because in the quest for gender equality, there is also, oh, we can only be equal if we're the same. but we're not the same. Gender neutrality, like one of the reasons we had the referendum in Ireland recently was um, in the push for gender equality. Let's make our constitution gender neutral so it's fair and good. These days, for something to be called sexist is simply acknowledging that there's a difference. You know, teenage boys run faster than teenage girls, sexist. There's not enough, or women aren't as interested in politics perhaps as men, sexist. You know, so if we make it gender neutral, gender equal, it all comes into it, I think.
And I think that is one of the ways in which it's a Christian heresy, in that Christianity insists that people are spiritually equal, but also the kingdom of heaven is not of this world, right? That doesn't demand that everyone is exactly equal, is exactly the same. But this ideology goes a step further and says, no, 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 any evidence that you might call up to show that there are differences between, say, men and women is unacceptable. It's like a really, really extremist version of this principle. I guess because it seems to be intolerable to think that people could be spiritually equal, but not equal in other ways.
Yeah, I mean, even the concept of equality itself has to be examined. The Taliban, there was an RTE journalist, Emer Lowe, in Afghanistan last year, the year before, and she interviewed a senior member of the Taliban. And she said, well, you know, women aren't allowed in, you know, travel certain distances and they have to cover up. And are men and women equal here? And he said, yes, yes, men and women are equal. So the very concept of equality needs to be interrogated. You know, what is it that we mean?
Yeah, yeah. And of course, given that those physical differences do exist, if you were actually to have strict equality between the sexes, you would end up probably doing a disservice to one sex or another. I mean, one example is something like maternity leave. If in a state that said no one gets any maternity leave, whether they be male or female, it would cost the women a lot more than it would cost the men, even though it was technically a regime of equality.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. And likewise then, so that would cost women more. In Ireland, in universities at the moment, we have quota systems and we have rules that if there's a job for an engineer to in as a lecturer and 99 men apply for it and one woman applies for it and they are all of the same, you know, degree or level of qualification, the woman will be given the job. So again, this is considered equality.
Yeah, it's bad. It has obvious, it's kind of obvious, terrible ramifications in terms of being anti-meritocratic. Talk to me more about the recent referendum. So there have been 3 in Ireland in the last decade. So the same-sex marriage, which passed, abortion, which passed, and then the most recent one, which didn't pass.
I think there was more. There was one about we could to lower the age of presidents that didn't pass, and
Okay.
there was one to take blasphemy out of the constitution that
Uh,
did pass. But
Interesting.
the big ones really were same sex marriage 2015, which was huge. 2018 legalization of abortion, and this year we had ones which were they had lovely names. The referendum on family and care. Now, who's going to vote no to family and who's going to vote no to care? And both of these were resoundingly defeated, extraordinarily so, because all of the polls had said they were going to pass.
Interesting.
Yeah, and the one on care, it was the biggest referendum defeat in the history of the state. So I had been I had been debating in favour of a no vote. And the morning of the count, I went to the count centre. I had a, you know, admission to go in. And I remember them standing behind the barricades and the counters, the bins, like huge bins, like wheelie bins, spilled out onto the table. And I was there looking at the ballot papers and it was just like, no, 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 no. I was just standing there. I was like, oh my God, oh my. I knew something huge had happened, but it just didn't make sense because of all the polls and the way mainstream media had generally were with the yes, yes side of things. I think it was a great moment for Ireland
Mm.
because I wanted it to be a no. So
And the government were pushing for yes, right?
the government, all of the political parties, except for one political party that's not in government called Aintu, all of the main political parties, even those in opposition, were calling for a yes, yes. The National Women's Council of Ireland was campaigning for a yes, yes. Most of the non-governmental organisations were campaigning for a yes, and lots of journalists and commentators. So,
And why do you think that voters were unpersuaded? Has the progressive religion not actually captured Ireland quite as much as we might have thought?
uh, yes, I think what you said. um, and the factor that I think hasn't been acknowledged by the media in the aftermath, immigration has been considered as a factor. There's been a lot of immigration in Ireland and a lot of protests against it. I think immigration in Ireland is being mismanaged at the moment. Um, like integration is a two-way process, and I don't think it can happen if you put 500 people into one hotel overnight in the middle of a town that's already, a shortage of housing or hotel spaces. So immigration was a factor. Mistrust. People were saying, "Oh, women, we need to change it. We need to get rid of this clause about women in the home. Women shouldn't be tied to the kitchen sink." And everybody knows women are not tied to the kitchen sink. So there was lies there from the outset. And I think one very powerful aspect of it is the one that hasn't been debated. It would have been the erasure of the word mother from the Irish Constitution. Um, and I think that really hit something deep with people and with Irish mothers. It was 2 days before the referendum took place, 2 days before Mother's Day.
Mm.
Yeah, I think it's common sense. People know women do most of the work in homes. Yes, there are some stay-at-home fathers, and I would welcome acknowledgement for them. It's not that I think women should be tied to the home. I think women should have a choice. However, a lot of women would prefer to be spending time at home with their children as opposed to out building a career. So people intuitively perhaps know this.
And it's interesting you mentioned about the immigration question. Do you think that to some extent it was interpreted as a protest, an opportunity to protest against
Yeah, yeah.
the government and kind of reigning ideology?
Yeah, I think some people definitely um, voted no because there was fears as well. Some people had fears that if we change the definition of family, it would allow for people to come to Ireland uh, who already had, extended members of their family or people who they had relationships with, and there was concerns that this would give them a green light to come to Ireland.
Oh, okay, so there'd be more chain migration.
Yeah, but
Okay.
also it had this ridiculous phrase that extending the definition of family to include those not just founded on marriage, but on durable relationships. Nobody was able to explain what was meant by a durable relationship. How long did a relationship have to last? Did it have to be sexual? Was it a relationship between a parent and a child? Because a lot of single parents wanted acknowledgement in the Constitution, but it wasn't clear. Was a durable relationship, was it vertical, parent child, or was it horizontal? If it was horizontal, could it be multiple people at the same time? Could it be thruples or truffles, as the joke was in government buildings one day? So there was a lot of confusion. If the government couldn't answer the questions themselves, I don't know where they got the wording. I put in a freedom of information request to find out, what wordings had been suggested to the departments looking after the referendum, but they refused my FOI. They said, we're not giving you that information. Now, I think they might be releasing it, but I'd love to know who had suggested this phrase.
Yeah, it's not fanciful to think that people would use it cynically to do all sorts of things, including, yes. I mean, it's not fanciful to think that in an increasingly de-Christianized society, things like polygamous marriage could be legalized. Why not?
Yeah, and it
It's a
wouldn't.
very normal thing in many religions, many societies.
Yeah,
So
and of
go on.
course, then it wouldn't even be a marriage. You could just have a relationship with three people. They're all durable relationships.
Yeah,
We're
that's
not
true.
we're not we're not married. And the other
Yes.
thing, just to say about the referendum, part of the justification for the referendum was that there had been a citizens' assembly on gender equality, and this citizens' assembly had recommended a referendum on changing Article 41.2, which was the one where, get rid of the clause about women in the home and get rid of the word mothers and make it gender neutral. But the Citizens' Assembly was itself, well, rigged is probably too strong a word, but they were meant to discuss men and women, girls and boys. And before even the members of the assembly met, there was 99 random selected members of the public. Before they even met, somebody within the core group of the Citizens' Assembly had said, right, we're going to change the word gender to gender identity. So the whole process, in some sense, was meaningless. Certainly, it was undermined.
The episode is not over. There is another maybe 30 minutes of content, but it is behind a paywall. If you would like access to that content, if you would like to show support for the show, paid subscriptions are what keep it on the road. Allow me to pay my producers, put food on the table, all that important stuff. The extended version of the podcast is available at my Substack, louiseperry.substack.com. That's where you can also find, as I say every week, bonus episodes, extended episodes, the MMM chat community, all of this. Please sign up for a paid subscription. It makes such an enormous difference to my ability to keep producing the podcast and grow it even bigger, produce more episodes, all that good stuff. There are other ways that you can show your support for the show as well. You can rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. You can like us on YouTube. You can tell your friends and family how much you like the show. If you find it valuable, all of these things make an enormous difference to our ability to keep making it. Thank you so much.